everyone. Hope you're doing fine during COVID. We are honored to have with us Professor Ranjay Gulati as our first guest in this new series. Professor Gulati is the Paul Lawrence Professor at Harvard Business School and the former head of the Organizational Behavior Unit at the school. Ranjay has done extensive work on resilience in companies and how companies can do well in both good times and bad times. And he has 5 books that he has authored that are bestsellers as well. We are delighted to have Professor Gulati with us today. Thank you for joining us, Ranjay.
Thank you, Punita. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you today. And thank you for inviting me to be with you today.
So Ranjay, what an opportune time to discuss resilience in companies, especially during COVID. And I know you've done a lot of work on companies and how they face adversity and how they are resilient in different economic environments. But of course, COVID is different. You know, the economic environment was showing a recession, but has quickly rebounded. So I was curious to know whether some of the work that you've done would apply to the current environment as well.
Yeah. So look, my original work on this was actually looking at what do companies do in down markets. And at that time, the whole question was really around the adversity response, that when we are faced with setbacks, we tend to hunker down and go into survival mode. And the punchline there was adversity is opportunity. While everyone else is hunkered down, you should be looking ahead at opportunity. You shouldn't just be managing cost, you should be investing for growth. And it's the combination of subtraction and addition that you have to do. You can't just do subtraction across the board. But I think there's a larger point now, because you're right, there's a kind of bit of a bounce back coming now. And so now the question you can ask is a larger question, that how do you build strategy in times of uncertainty? Because we don't know, right? Yes, we can make prognostications about the market is bouncing back. There's a revenge travel and the revenge shopping and the revenge this. But do we really know? And I think the question leaders are faced now with is that we are embarked in a space where there's unprecedented uncertainty. Technological uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty, health uncertainty. There's a lot of issues right now at play. How do you build and think about growth in these kind of contexts?
No, you're absolutely right, Ranjay. In fact, some of the trends look like they're going to change permanently, like working from home, digitization. There are certain trends like these that have just accelerated because of COVID. So in your research, do you think companies need to change and invest in some of these trends permanently? Or do you think that they really should be very prudent in the way they make their investments in some of these new trends?
So, you know, I think I recently interviewed Kevin Johnson, the CEO of Starbucks, for a series I've been doing. And he said, if we don't come out of this different, we wasted an opportunity, right? And everyone, I think, is talking about that. One of my good friends and former students, Niren Chowdhury, the CEO of Panera Bread, which is one of the largest players here in the I would say not QSR, but kind of a fine, not dining, kind of fast dining category, says, you know, how do you learn to not think in a bunker but think like a windmill? So how do you do that? And I think you're right. So some things are changing. You mentioned remote work. Of course, there's going to be more remote work. The question is how much? Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be 2 days a week? Are you going to permanently shut down and say permanent work for some people? We don't know the answers to that. So the question then becomes, how do you navigate your way into this space? Yes, we need to change. How much, how little? That becomes the question that we're trying to find our way into. And there are no answers.
So, you know, I was reading some of your research and you talked about pragmatic companies are the ones that seem to do the best coming out of a recession. And you had 4 different categories of companies in the way managements, you know, take action. So it would be helpful, I think, if you just give us some context of what are the kinds of companies that might do well in this environment in terms of how they should invest and think of their strategy.
So I think it's a great question, Punita. So I think, first of all, I think we're all in agreement that we're going to change, whether it's the way we work, whether we interact with our supply chain, whether the way we interact with our customers. Is it going to be digitized? How is it going to be streamlined? So we know there's a lot of changes coming. We don't know how much, how little, how fast. Now, here is the problem that you mentioned the study where I talked about pragmatic companies. The hallmark of pragmatic companies was they understand how to do addition and subtraction at the same time. My observation was companies get good at doing one or the other. They're either adding value, customer value, differentiation, how do we do that? Or they're subtracting value. How do we take cost out, take cost out? They don't know how to do both simultaneously. And I just did a piece this last year in the Harvard Business Review, where I looked at the budgeting process income. I said, let's look at how do companies do their budget, and they run their budget in an annual budgeting cycle. Basically, last year's number becomes your entitlement for this year, and you're going to work plus and minus around it. Very simple thing like that, but that's where resources get allocated. How are you deploying resources? So you might say pivot, you might say agility, you might say all these great buzzwords that we have, but when the rubber hits the road, how are you deploying resources? And are you able to subtract here and add over there? Can you take from Peter and give to Paul? Or you're doing cheese slicer, everybody give me 10%. So how do we take a very surgical, very, very strategic perspective in saying, we made a play here that we're going to take out from here and put over there. And
so, one of the things I found as I looked at across sectors is that the companies that are in the services sector have done a much better job in being able to engage with their employees and keep productive assets working, because a lot of employees can work from home. Now, companies that are in manufacturing obviously need workers to come to work, and their business model hasn't changed as much. So do you, in your work, have you seen that certain industries do better in terms of resilience coming out of adversity?
Yeah, so look, adversity comes in many flavors, right? Unfortunately, this is a health-based adversity that we have. And so any business where physical proximity or physical presence is required naturally has suffered more than others. In other contexts, I wouldn't say if you had adversity that is economic adversity, technological adversity, or geopolitical adversity, regulatory adversity, other kinds of adversities, I think it's different. So I wouldn't generalize saying it's sector specific. I think there what you see is really about the leadership mindset. How are they playing, to quote, as I said earlier, are they playing the bunker strategy or are they playing the windmill strategy? How are they coming at the market? Are they pragmatic where they're playing offense and defense?
So Ranjay, what you're saying is that leadership is very important, and regardless of which industry you're in, within the same industry, if a leader is strong, then there are companies that are going to do better, even in adversely affected sectors, like say, in this case, travel, tourism. So what should leaders be doing to come out of adversity?
You're touching on, actually, Punita, a very age-old question in research. So very, very long time ago, my colleague, esteemed colleague, Michael Porter, talked about the famous five forces, right? That explained industry profitability, that explained average industry profitability, saying some industries are just more attractive than others. And you want to understand profitability differences across industry, just look at the five forces to understand why some industries are better than others. And maybe as COVID hits, buyer power changes, supplier power changes, rivalry changes, entry barriers change, something changes. And so some industries become more attractive than others in this shuffling as a result of this exogenous shock. But there was some other research that also looked within industries. So one of the studies that was done by a gentleman, Professor Dick Rumelt, who said, let me take the worst industry of all. One of the worst industries at the time was iron and steel. This is dated research. I'm talking about decades ago. And he showed that within this horrible industry, horrible meaning low profit industry, there were some companies like Nucor who were making a lot of money. So his argument was that's where the term competitive advantage came into play. That, it's not just which industry, which game you're playing. You can win in a very unattractive industry also. Southwest Airlines learned to make money in an industry where nobody else seemed to make money. Bob Crandall once said, if you want to make a small fortune in the airline industry, start with a large fortune, right? So it was, but they found a way to make money. So I think the same thing applies to the context we're in. These shocks are shaking up industries fundamentally. But there's got to be an industry effect, but there's going to be a firm effect as well. And it's going to be, what are the moves the firm is willing to make in response to shifts in the industry? Peter Drucker long ago said this. He said, it's not the market shock that kills companies. It's the inability to respond to those shocks in markets. How are you willing to adapt? And we use fancy words. The problem is we use big words, agility, pivot, adapt. We throw out words at people. It's much harder to reimagine your business. It was really hard for Microsoft to go into cloud computing. It was a fundamental rethinking of their revenue model, right? You had a licensing fee model, $180 per site, and you got it every 5 years, right? Versus $100 a year given to you over time like an annuity. It may sound easy, it may seem like, come on, but these are very tough decisions. I'll give you one more example of a company. Etsy. For those who don't know, Etsy is an e-commerce platform that connects sellers of craft goods, loosely defined, with buyers. Now, in the last year, Etsy sales have doubled because of one thing primarily. I don't know if it's primarily, I didn't break it down, but it's masks. People needed cloth masks. So you had all these entrepreneurs emerging, buying a sewing machine and saying, I'm going to make masks and I'm going to sell them for $20 a pop. And this thing took off. Now the question is, what's next? At some point, mask sales are going to taper off, right? How many masks people have? Okay, some people have a fashion collection of masks, but come on. So what's the next play? So you start to see businesses, retail is being reimagined, right? Dining, in-room dining is being reimagined. Like, how is that going to work? So I think we have to, and we don't know how much. It's not going to be completely remote, but it's not maybe going to go back to where it was once upon a time. So if you're in real estate, you're asking this question, what will commercial real estate look like today? How do we need to reimagine ourselves? So I think this reimagining our business is somehow hard because we don't know what we don't know yet.
Your research said that companies that make too much change and really change their business model perhaps don't do as well as others that do it in a more measured way. But there are certain industries, as you said, in your case, in-room dining or Etsy, where you almost have to change your business model quite dramatically. So how would you use your research in these kind of industries which have been so challenged and really need to make a big change, or should they still do it very pragmatically?
Yeah. So I want to be self-critical here for a minute. With people like myself who are researchers, we are very opportunistic in looking ex post, and then hindsight bias. If you do a change and it works, we say, oh yeah, I knew it. I knew that was going to work. And if you do a change and it doesn't work, we say, I knew, it won't work. And so we are very opportunistic in how we talk about this. But I think we do know some things that in general, that by and large, we know that don't try too many new things all at once. So in fact, one of the other companies I taught recently a case on, which a colleague of mine has written, on the transformation of Lego, which almost went out of business. And one of the things, that Jorn von Rutstrup, the CEO, when he took over this company and turned it around, figured out was that they were pursuing all kinds of it. Because in the year 2000, they were like, oh my God, online gaming is going to kill us. And people don't want bricks anymore. So they were trying, they had theme parks, they had movies, they had digital games, they had this, they had that. And they had lost sight of their core business. So in hindsight, you can say, well, he said, listen, we gotta and we gotta decide how many adjacencies are we gonna go after. And how few and how many. Of course, it depends on how quickly your market is changing, but we always say fewer is better. But I'll just give you one last example, Punita, on this, and this tells you why it's confusing. So another company case that we have taught for many years is Nike. It's a great story. And Nike began as a men's shoe company, right? It was a running shoe company. And at some point, they had to make a decision that should we expand beyond shoes? And also, should we expand outside America? So the question was, do I expand new geographies or do I expand into new categories? And so we teach the case saying, so what do you think? And then we say, you know what? The answer is you can't do both. You can't go into new geographies while expanding into new categories. You got to do one, choose and sequence it. Well, guess what? Nike did both and they succeeded at it. So, it's really hard to know. I think we always say, yes, you have to place your bets. You got to focus on execution. You got to be very deliberate and thoughtful about it. I think what the beauty of thing is uncertainty and change creates opportunity. We are in a very unique moment where there is so much flux in markets, in customer buying behavior, in customer preferences, whatever you want to call it, pain points. All these things are changing in flux. So that means there's opportunity. Now, do you place bets? How do you place bets? So if you haven't also, I'll just do a shout out for another colleague of mine's book. Stefan Tomke has a book out this past year on experimentation. And the whole conversation there is about you have to run experiments sometimes in trying to figure these things out. And while I'm doing a shout out, Punita, I have to talk about my own research coming out next year. So before I end, I'll talk about that. But
Sure. So Ranjay, what you're saying is there's no magic bullet, right? All the research that you've done at Harvard Business School, you haven't come up with a magic bullet that would work in terms of, certain things that companies must absolutely do in adversity.
Of course, so let me give you the answer to that. So tough question, but a good question. First of all, I wanted to clarify to you, adversity is opportunity, right? Don't forget that, right? Adversity is opportunity. Learn to play offense while playing defense. You can't just play defense. So it's a great time to look for new opportunity. On the market-facing side, on the enterprise side, on the supplier-facing side. So it's a tremendous opportunity to reimagine your business in ways that maybe others are not doing, if you have that mindset, right? The second thing I think it's important to look at is you look for adjacency. You're looking in adjacent opportunities. So you're looking to grow the enterprise, not just by improving what you're already doing, but you're looking to grow in adjacent areas, right? So you're looking organic and inorganically, you're trying to find adjacent areas in which you want to grow. And what might those be? I mean, there's simple things. I'll tell you one that I know of, a hospital group that opened a pharmacy extension in their hospital, which became a huge line of revenue and profit for them. So you look for simple adjacencies. I mean, Uber Eats is an extension of Uber. I mean, there are so many examples I can give you of adjacencies. So you're looking for adjacencies that leverage what you already have, right? So those are, I think, our principles. But you can't go the mistakes we make is either we hunker down and go into defense, or when we're playing offense, we're like, okay, I'm going to try 17 different things.
Which is why you say pragmatic companies do the best, or pragmatic leaders do the best.
Yeah.
Right. Have you found in all your organizational work any leadership traits that bring companies out of adversity better?
So let's talk about leadership. It's a subject near and dear to my heart. I think there's a certain, first of all, I want to just start with something is, what is the mindset you need to thrive in adversity? And there are really 4 elements of that mindset: curiosity, humility, empathy, and winning. Now, I want to explain those to you one at a time. Because when companies are successful, why do successful companies fail? Because that mindset shifts. Curiosity, what happens to curiosity? It turns into know-it-all. What happens to humility? It turns into arrogance. What happens to empathy for customers? It turns into indifference. And what happens to winning? it turns into not losing. You want to hold what you have. You want to preserve what you have. And you go into a defensive posture. So that's my kind of market view of leadership. Now I think we have to have an enterprise view of leadership. Like, how do leaders think about their enterprise? And I'd like to believe, and I look at this, I've seen this now, and there are many, great leaders, some of Indian origin. I mean, Satya Nadella is one, Indra Nooyi was another one, but others too. I mean, I mentioned Jörn von Nuttstrup, right? And I can rattle off a bunch of names who start with a sense of purpose. Purpose for the enterprise first. Why does my enterprise, why do we exist? Now, it may sound like a very, existential academic question. It's actually a very real question because it sharpens for you your strategy, it sharpens your value proposition. It also becomes a rallying cry in the organization. It connects you to your community. It's not a mission statement only. So I am not talking about the mission statement that you have on the wallpaper that nobody looks at. When I say purpose, and that's the research I've been doing in the last couple of years in looking at companies that actually have tried to build an enterprise with a strong sense of why do we exist. Go and look at the Microsoft purpose statement and how Satya evolved that. And then you link the purpose statement to the culture, the way he describes in his book. That how do you connect it? And I interviewed Satya, and Satya talked about the idea that he says, businesses are going to change like crazy in these markets. Our strategy is going to change. Our organization is going to change. We have to change constantly. But we have to have some constants in our business. And those constants and those guardrails come in the form of your purpose and your culture. And they have to work together in helping the enterprise move forward. Now, that's at the enterprise level. I want to go back to what I said about employees. Then the unlock is connecting that to individual purpose, helping people see how they can live out themselves as living purposeful lives through work, right? Work doesn't have to be a drag, doesn't have to be a job. You don't have to be satisfied or even engaged. How can you get inspired work out of people? The same people performing at much different levels of productivity. How do you extract greater value in a way that is also satisfying to the work of people themselves? It's a true classic win-win. That's what leadership do.
So given a lot of our audience is going to be investors, do you have any final words of wisdom for them?
If you're an investor, of course, you don't have a crystal ball, but what you do have is potentially access to leading indicators. Look at what customers are doing for these, how are customers perceiving the brand? Look at how employees are reporting and talking about this company on Glassdoor. Look at other possible leading indicators which will give you an understanding of what is the management of this organization doing, so you are ahead of the game, ahead of the curve, right? Looking for superior returns, you're looking to see who is going to perform well. So I think that's going to be the real unlock as you think in the future, forward looking.
Oh, great. So Ranjay, before we let you go, tell us about what you're working on next and what's going to be another important trend that we should all be looking at.
So what I'm looking at is really these purpose-driven organizations. How organizations enact purpose, not write a purpose statement, enact purpose in the organization. And there's not me, there are others who've shown actually that these firms generate superior returns. They generate superior top line and bottom line performance. They actually innovate faster, are much more adept at dealing with markets, are able to grant autonomy and have a more empowered workforce. So it's an unlock that I think we don't fully appreciate in markets. You say purpose is an existential, idealistic statement about how I'm going to give money to CSR. It is that, and it is so much more. And it's not only, it's going to be a huge opportunity play. We have investors who are demanding it, But there's shareholder value creation here. And besides that, it's the right thing to do. And if you don't do it, you will lose your license to operate. It has tremendous payoffs.
Thank you much, Ranjay. This was very insightful, and it's an opportune time for all who are in the business, whether it is managements, leadership, board members, or investment professionals, to know what companies need to do coming out of adversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Punita. Great questions, and I really enjoyed it. All the very best to you and your audiences, and safe times ahead.
Thank you.